welcome to the latest From the Sidelines with Jon Akin here on the SDH Network. I'm Jason Longshore. Jon Akin is over here. How are you, Jon?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thanks for having me this morning.
No problem. We're going to get on a weekly schedule now. People really enjoyed the first episode, and it's kind of a show that will maybe pull the cover back a little bit on coaching and some of the things that those of us who haven't coached at a high level like ask questions about and wonder about, and you're our guide into all of this, Jon. So, no pressure or anything.
Yeah, I hope I can do a good job and connect with people on it. It's great opportunity, and you know me, I could do this all day long. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, if we just start recording the conversations that we have like off air, then we've got another whole podcast episode to throw out, so we're good.
Oh yeah, we go throw the B-roll out at the end of the season.
Yeah, for sure. What I wanted to get into today is something that has come up a lot over the last week or two in the Atlanta United world, and it's balance. And for those of you who are listening and haven't paid close attention to the Atlanta lineups lately, it's been a very aggressive, attack-minded team. And with Luis Araujo coming into the team, that creates an attacking four with Joseph Martinez and Ezequiel Barco and Marcelino Moreno and Luis Araujo, all super talented players that you want to get on the field as much as possible. Then to balance that, there's three center backs who are all playing very well lately in Miles Robinson, Alan Franco, Anton Walk's hard to take any one of them off the field. You have to have wing backs, so Atlanta has two very good ones in Brooks Lennon and George Bello, and that leaves one additional player to have the balance, and it's been Santiago Sosa, and in the last match it was Amar Sejdic. Not a typical kind of formation, if you want to even get into that we normally see. And one of the questions I've had for Rob Valentino over the last couple weeks is, how do you ensure that you have the balance with wanting to get those attackers on the field, but also being secure defensively? And Oglethorpe is in the very beginning of their season. Regular season play is about to get started. So, Jon, what I want to ask you is, at this stage, when you're starting to plan ahead, and you look at what you have, and if you've got more quality attackers and defenders or vice versa, how do you look at achieving balance at the beginning of a campaign? What are some of the things that go into your process there?
Sure. Well, going back to what we discussed a couple weeks ago about preseason, we've got our 3 preseason matches, and there's not a whole lot of coaching. There's some generalizations, some terms, but it's really looking at the ingredients that we have, looking at the characteristics of the players, who's healthy. We have a general philosophy about what we want to do that, allows us to evaluate players and bring those players into our program. But at the end of the day, you don't know until you're working with them day in, day out. And so over the last week and going through one more week before we kick off, we'll continue to evaluate, and maybe 2 or 3 days before we'll fine tune some stuff. But then it's about, how do you get the best players on the field at the same time within a system? So I think most coaches, certainly at the professional level, could probably teach several different things. Maybe they believe in one system over another, but you can't play a certain system if those players, the ingredients, if you will, don't have characteristics. So that you need to be successful. And then it's a balance of, who's healthy, who's, what partnerships, the understanding and things like that. And then you just try to hammer it home and hope it works. And again, most players, at the professional level, or even, good college teams, they can attack, defend, but it's probably clear they're more one than the other. And then you start to work your way backwards with regards to, well, could you get away with 3? Do you need to start with 5, in the back? And then what are like you said, that link player, you have, 4 extremely good attacking players. You've got 3 traditional, center backs, and then how do you put the pieces of the puzzle? It's almost like Sudoku in some ways, who fits where with the characteristics and the availability that you have at your disposal. And then you could start that way. Some people are absolutely married to a formation. I tend to work a different way, but some people just force them into some roles and maybe limit what they do within those roles to fit that. So there's a couple of different ways you can do it. And it's just, and it goes back to that balance. You can't be all attack or you get exposed at the back. It can't be all defense or you'll never score a goal. So, in there lies the problem.
Yeah. It's interesting with some managers who are stuck in a certain kind of formation, and when they don't have the players to fit what they want, because I mean, you can go through it whatever level you're at. If you're a youth coach, if you're a high school, college, pro, any of the above, like, you can never have the perfect roster construction to get exactly what you want. And you have injuries that pop up, and you have loss of form and all kinds of things that happen. It feels like if you are very rigid in the way that you see the game from a structure standpoint, sometimes it can be incredibly difficult to achieve what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you let's use this as an example. You're totally committed to getting around the outside in a 4-3-3, and you've got your winger that's completely right-footed, and you do that. Let's just say due to whatever yellow card accumulation, injuries. The only available attacking player to you is left-footed. Mm-hmm. So, you've got your tactical to see this is what we do every time we get to the end line. And then you have to put a left-footed player, as your right winger. I mean, maybe you could tweak some other things, but then you're pulling a right back to maybe play right wing, and they're not as comfortable there. They're better coming from deep. So, you can't get upset with that left-sided player or left-footed player you're playing on the right side to get to the end line and whip balls in with his right foot, bending into the runs, because that's not who he is. And so you have to kind of understand the characteristics of the player, how they fit in, and you can't be 100% committed to that because you might not have that at your disposal. And you can't beat a player up because you're trying to make them something they're not for 90 minutes when they've been something their whole life. So.
Yeah, and that's something that I look at somebody like Bruce Arena, who I think at times gets a very bad rap tactically. But you think back to the 2002 World Cup and what he had to work with going into a round of 16 game against Mexico. And I know this is a long time ago, but he showed some elements of this with the New England Revolution too, where he had a bunch of injuries. I think he had at least one player suspended on yellow card accumulation. And they had not played anything resembling a 5-3-2, and that's what he had to work with in that game, with Claudio Reyna as a right wing back, which I don't think he had ever played, and I don't think he ever played it again. And it worked because he had to find in that game, which had higher stakes, the balance between attack and defense, but also the balance between what he wanted to do and what he was able to do with what he had to work with. It seems like it's a tough challenge at times in a season to make all of that fit.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, I don't remember the game exactly. I know I was watching it, intently, but, Claudio is the kind of player that, could play anywhere on the field.
Right.
And I think he understood, hey, you tuck in sometimes and join the midfield, or, hey, you're getting up and down the flank. Obviously Bruce knew him as well as anybody, probably on the planet, as far as playing wise goes. And probably personally, and he knew probably what he could get away with. And I think, you can say what you want to about Bruce Arena, but I think, he understands characteristics of players, and I think that transcends club, high school, college, and pro, and it transcends sports. If you know the nuances enough, he might not be able to go to, some of these guys because he didn't play, at a high level. I think he was a lacrosse guy, actually. But he knew enough to know what he could get away with, and I think he knows his players well enough in the locker room to know what they're capable of. And that's coaching. It's just putting them in, limiting mistakes, and then putting them in situations to, to be successful and work together as a cohesive group. And I think that goes with personnel, and it also goes with balance of, the attack and defense. You can't put in the top leagues, you're not putting 6 or 7 absolute, strikers on the field, or you're going to get exposed. So that's what you're always trying to strike and balance. And usually it's some configuration of 5 and 5, right?
Right.
5 attacking players in the field, 5 defensive players. And if you have that, that's kind of the magic mirror number, if you will, where 5 are going to be a little bit more like this, and 5, defensively, and 5 are going to be a little bit more attacking. It's kind of a good rule of thumb, if you will, to not get too carried away one way or another.
That's what's so fascinating about Atlanta United at the moment, and we'll see what Gonzalo Pineda does taking over training this week. It's almost like the wing backs are both, and you have guys with the characteristics in Bello and Lennon and the lung capacity to be able to be both. But they almost go with those two as the two who flip it to 6 either way, because you have the 4 attackers with Araujo, Barco, Moreno, and Joseph up top. You have the 4 defensive players, the 3 center backs with Robinson, Franco, and Walks, and a holding midfielder, so when he's healthy, or Sadic like in the last match. And it's Bello and Lennon who are the ones who turn it to attacking with 6 or defending with 6. And it's a little bit different spin on the balance conversation.
Yeah, and you could break down probably every scenario. My guess is, and it happens sometimes because it's soccer. There's just, millions of scenarios every time. But, a lot of times, unless they're chasing the game, it's probably not Bello banging a diagonal ball to Lennon.
Right.
So if Bello's, attacking on the left-hand side, Lennon's probably holding a little bit more to keep that 5 and 5. Now, if they're chasing the game, especially with some of the athletes they have, Miles Robinson's, just another planet athletically. You can cheat a little bit more. Maybe it does become the 6, and I know you've seen them a little bit more than I have, so it probably is that way. But you're also kind of hedging your bets with, 3 guys staying home no matter what, and then 1 guy pressing on the side in a counterattack, and those 2 guys holding until, and delaying until people can recover.
It feels like kind of getting to that level. I mean, this is second half of the season for Atlanta United, and yes, they've gone through coaching changes, but this is something that would be difficult at the very beginning to implement. So let's go to where you are right now with Oglethorpe, and starting to think about your 5 and 5 and how the configurations look. How do you feel so far with a couple of preseason games under your belt in terms of where your squad is with balance?
It's funny. We have such a good complement of players. We basically almost in our 2 preseason matches, we played 3 waves of players. So, roughly 30 available players, 4 keepers and, 26 available field players. So we're rotating more than 2 lines of players, we're extending scrimmages to get 120 minutes and, doing some things like that. But, our starting 11, our first 11 and our second 11 are pretty interchangeable right now. And we're trying to, like I said, going back to last week, we talked about, we're just giving them the opportunity to see who's dominating and who's not. A couple of the really good young players were injured, just really carrying a couple of small things that we just didn't use them in the second scrimmage. But it's really competitive right now. And I think that we've got 1 more game to kind of fight it out, if you will, and then we're going to have to kind of roll with, a group. And I think some of them are shaping up, but the balance between the older players and the newer players and proving themselves, I like where we're at. Right now we're pretty committed to a 4-3-3, but we have a few players that have characteristics that might give us a really good different look, but we're not going to look at that too much until we kind of get through, playing out what these guys are capable of, and, who's going to grab these positions and not let go.
How far ahead do you think as you get into these kind of spots? Like, I know you have your base and you have your philosophy and the way that you come into a season expecting to play. And are you already thinking about, well, if this part doesn't work, I've got this option, or I'd like to be able to get to where we go 3-4-3 at times? Or how far ahead are you thinking about what could come?
Yeah, it's the tricky part. I mean, we've got one final scrimmage, and again, like I mentioned, it's very tight between some players about who we could go with and who couldn't. And we need to see how that plays out, but we also need to be one step ahead. So, in our final scrimmage, we might go with a different formation, 3-4-3, 3-5, 3-5-2, something we haven't done in a while, to say, hey, if the chemistry doesn't quite work, can we get a look at something that might be a little bit more into the characteristics of the players that we have? And we're going to probably hedge our bets and, use a window of time to just throw it out there. I mean, without even really have worked on it, is there some organic, chemistry to what this could be? And we'll get a glimpse, and, we won't throw it out the window one way or another because we haven't trained on, any of it really. But we want to see if there's something there. And if so, we'll probably do some tactical periodization with regards to, a few days working with this, a few days working with that, just in case at some point during the season we need to, so.
Tell me a little bit more about the periodization. Like, it's something that, a lot of people associate with Jose Mourinho as maybe one of the first ones to bring that way of training to the fore, and now it's very common. It was something that we talked about on the show a good bit when Paulo Fonseca was being mentioned as a possibility for Atlanta United. How do you kind of interpret that and use it in your day-to-day training?
It goes back to that balance. We have so little time. We don't have the luxury that 10, 11 months, even youth pro teams working 4 days a week have. We've got 11 weeks, 12 weeks of a season, and if I'm stealing minutes from committing to one formation and getting them the reps they need, I'm cutting into maybe maximizing that philosophy or that system, if you will. But at the same time, you have to be prepared for plan B or whatever you're going to call it. So it's there's obviously the physical periodization of high and low intensity, leading into match play. Obviously, you're not going to be at 100% intensity the day after a match. It needs to be the lowest intensity, so you're balancing out that periodization physically. But you can also look at it tactically on giving a certain amount of time to a certain formation based on what you might need. So for example, let's just say probably this coming week we'll probably do 3 days on after we get this final look, we're going to kind of throw a system out there based on the characteristics of the players. And then if it works, maybe we go 2 days one day, one system, 2 days another, just as looks. If we just see something there, we might go 3 days working in one system and 1 day another. And you just try to, wean one off or develop one over a month-long period. Let's just say getting into conference play. And then you may need to just stick with something at that point. It's basically like 4 weeks of non-conference, 4 weeks of conference play, and that's kind of the window, the pathway into like tournament. So something like 3-1 in 1 week, or 2-2, depending on what you see. And that's the roles and responsibilities of whatever system you're going to go with. So that's that tactical periodization.
How much do you, in those moments where you're starting to consider these kinds of things, how much do you lean on your staff and the people around you and get some different impressions from people?
I mean, you know me pretty well. I'm open. I mean, my staff can say, hey, I don't see it at all, and all 3 or 4 of them have told me, no, that's not, the way it's going to go, or we don't see it, and I've gone against that. And then, sometimes even one person will, say, I don't think that's going to work, and we'll go with that too. It just kind of depends. Right. We made an independent or a individual change that was very, kind of against the grain. And, I just made the call and it worked out in the scrimmage. They were a little surprised by that, but it kind of came off, and I've done it before where it didn't come off. So I want to be challenged in our staff, and we've got some really good people on board, and they've got some good opinions. I'm pretty strong in mine, but at the same time, it's about what comes off on the field and what's best for the kids and the team. So no ego, it's just about getting it done.
There's always that balance of, these things that you work on, and then you get into a match situation, and sometimes you have to go with your gut. And, I think to Guardiola at Bayern and playing Philipp Lahm as a 6, as a holding midfielder or something he hadn't really played much before, and it was one of his assistants saying, hey, we have a problem. Like, we don't have a 6 right now. We have a bunch of people hurt. It's not working what we're trying. Throw Philip there. Let's see what happens. I think it'll work. And then they discover, oh, yeah, you might be one of the best in the world at this position as well. How much does that kind of thing really happen, where you go through the process, you're trying to create the balance, you work on things that are in the week, and then you get into a match and you do have to kind of follow your gut because things fall apart?
Yeah, I mean, you want to be, as professional as possible and playing for those things. But there's those moments that keep everything fresh. That, that's the spontaneous part of the sport. That is it's a beautiful thing. It's nerve-wracking at times, and it's, you're a genius if it comes off, and you're an absolute idiot if it doesn't. So it's exciting, and you hope that over time you get more and more experience, and you've gone through those similar scenarios that you can lean on to use as a reference point, and hopefully it comes off. But hopefully there's not too many of those.
Yeah. Hopefully you've covered all the ground and you've got everything prepared, all the different possibilities. I want to follow up on a couple other questions about balance. I love the concept, and I think it's easy for people to understand, of basically 5 and 5. Now you can configure it however you want. It can be 3 up top and 2 behind. It can be 3 to center backs and 2 in front. It can be a line of 4 with 1 in front. It can go a million different directions. But the idea of 5 and 5, now you get into a match and decisions then have to be made about either securing a lead and maybe adding one more defensive player to that, but you still want to have some kind of a threat going the other way, or vice versa. You have to go find a game winner, and you've got to make sure you don't give up goal number 3 or 4 and end the game, but you've got to get another attacker on. How much does that kind of stuff get worked on during the week, where you're basically forcing yourself to be out of balance?
Sure. It definitely gets worked on, because you're going to have to chase the game sometimes, and you're going to have to sit in. And I'll even throw another, variable at you where, you might say, hey, we're up 1-0, we're away from home, and we've got Bello and Brooksland or whoever your outside backs are in a 5-3-2, 3-5-2, whatever you want to call it. Let's have them sit in a little bit more. Well, then if they're building out of the back and getting a little bit of a rhythm, you might be exposing yourselves by letting them advance the ball higher and pin you and press in. So you've got to understand the context of the game. Maybe you give up one of your attacking mids, you take out Barco if you're playing your let's just say you're playing a direct team, right? And they're going to bang a ball in, and for the most part, Miles Robinson's going to head the ball out, but how do you cover the space in front of the back line and, win the second ball? So maybe you take out a Barco, who may be quick and, cause some problems up there because you need maybe a second person that's a little bit stronger in the air to even win that second ball and kind of help clear your lines, if you will, and get those out. So it's there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I think you do need to prepare for some of those scenarios, because every team, in some way, shape, or form is going to be in those knockdown dragouts, chasing the game. And this is what it's going to look like when, you have a second striker in there. We're going to play with 3 up front, but we need a second center forward to, get chances in the box. This is where we're going to pull from, and, here's who's making the runs in the box in the final third then. So, that's another way to look at it, but absolutely during the week, it needs to be worked on. A lot of times, we work 11 against 8, just to say our two of the three, front players didn't come back at all. How are you going to deal with this scenario of coming back? So
that's a good one, and that's something that I think always comes up when you see these kind of red card situations, and us announcers always have the kind of, well, this isn't something you work on very often, playing with 10 or playing against 10, but it actually is something that you guys do a decent bit, not as much as maybe full field, full setup, but it is something that gets worked on, so it's not completely foreign to the players in those moments.
Yeah, and a lot of times when we do attack against defense, we create those scenarios, those numerical disadvantages and advantages, on purpose. You just got to, think about that. Let's just say the five, let's use the reference point we started with earlier. Let's just say five guys just, end to end, they're just absolutely, done. How do you defend with 5 against 8?
Right.
What does that look like? Obviously you're going to encourage them to play the ball wide and, take your chances when you're protecting the goal, and try to use the principles of the game and just play your odds. That's really what it is. Just, trying to create numbers up and numbers down scenarios in, advantageous spaces, in the attacking side of things with lots of space, and then, minimizing the space that the other team has to play with, or dangerous areas that the other team has to play with, no matter what the numbers look like, in your third.
And let me end it with this one. So we've talked a lot of balance, front to back, offense, defense kind of stuff. The DC match against Atlanta on the weekend saw a different form of being out of balance, or trying to trying to tilt the balance your way. DC with Andy Nahar as a right center back, who typically plays right back or a right wing back, was bombing forward a lot and creating a very difficult situation for Atlanta to deal with, because he's coming out of the back. He's unaccounted for. DC, obviously, with Julian Gressel on the right side, they're very right side focused. How much do you think about the characteristics of your team as you're preparing a match plan, and think about how balanced or unbalanced you want to be left to right?
Yeah, I think it goes back down to, maybe if you're planning for what you described, maybe you see a weakness in the other team and you try to overload that side and see if, you can get an advantage. But let's just say you're playing with like 2 right wingers, where you're just trying to create overlap after overlap and, break their back line and get the defenders facing their own goal when you can get to the end line. But you've also got to be prepared where, the left side, you're going to take some heat, because you're so exposed on the right. And how do you drop that, in? Does your left midfielder or your left winger, know that, hey, if you don't get in this cross, it's an 80-yard sprint to recover every single time. And then, once that, you also know that guy can't do that for a long time, or very few players in the world can. So your substitution pattern might change to compensate for that extra stuff that guy's going to have to do, because you're sending everybody down the right. So that's the right to left balance as well. And how it goes into the tactical plan is it might affect your substitutes. It might, maybe you might use the recovery run from the holding center midfielder might be directly into the back line,
right,
as opposed to sitting in front of the back line. Because the left side obviously is going to have less players to deal with the next wave that's coming from the opposing team.
Stuff's interesting. It gets really fascinating when you start thinking about moving the chess pieces around and how it looks on the board. I get the sense you're the kind of manager that is about getting the best players on the field and figuring out the balance and the shape as you go. It was something that came up a lot with Scotland this summer in the Euros, where 2 of their best players in the country are left backs, and you're not going to play one of them and leave one of your best players off the field because of that. So they created a system with one as the left-sided center back with 3, and the other as a left wing back, and created a lot of rotation on that side because they were the 2 best players in the team. Feels like you would create those kinds of scenarios if it's about getting your best players on the field, and you're not rigid like we talked about at the beginning with it has to be in this shape and that's it.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to, believing, what I believe is players win games and coaches lose them. So, with that being said, you know, they're your best players, or they have certain characteristics that are special, and they're not contributing, if they're not on the field. So you've just got to figure out the problem a different way. And I think that's what it comes down to. We can't play the game for them. We can't, touch the ball in. It's these guys and girls, whomever you're coaching, that have the talent, the desire, the unique way they see the game. And when they're on the field, they can do that. And when they're not, it's hard to do that. I just try to throw them out there and figure it out because they're the ones that are special.
What's this week look like for you with preparing as we get closer to the season opener?
Sure. Training session today, it'll be a little more intense than a day before the game. We came off our Friday night game, Sunday night game, off yesterday. Session today, we'll look at a couple different things tactically, and then we're playing Piedmont tomorrow in our last preseason, tune-up game, if you will, and then we have to make some decisions on depth chart, and just kind of run with it. So we'll do an inter squad Friday or Saturday, give the guys some time off, and then we've got a long week. The week after, we've got a Wednesday game. We kind of had to throw on there. We're away at Tennessee Southern, the former Martin Methodist, because we couldn't start preseason on time if we didn't have a game that day. And then we turn into two monster games, Washington and Lee and Emory, who are probably, going to be top 20 teams this year. So it'll be an intense week. And talk about rotation of players. We're going to need it with a Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday game going into next week.
Whew. It's ramping up fast. It's ramping up really fast.
And it is 100%.
Man, I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing this team in action. Jon, thanks for the time today.
My pleasure, Jason. Love being here. Thanks for having me.